Dana White looked directly at a reporter on May 7th and said, "We are in a great place with Conor." Said he was extremely confident that Conor would fight this summer. Said there is footage out there proving he is training, and the people who heard those specific words understood immediately that they were not listening to a man guessing or managing expectations, but to a man who has spoken to the people around the deal and knows where it stands. When the most credible journalist the sport has produced, a 15-time MMA Journalist of the Year, stakes his reputation publicly on a specific fight happening on a specific date, the conversation moves from speculation into something closer to a countdown. And the countdown he has staked his reputation on ends at UFC 329 on July 11th, with Conor McGregor returning to the octagon against Max Holloway at welterweight. The fight has been 13 years in the making, and the reason that number carries weight is not metaphorical but literal, because these two men actually shared a cage once before, in 2013, on the preliminary card of a fight night that casual fans do not remember. And everything that happened to both of them in the 13 years between that undercard appearance and the main event of International Fight Week 2026 is the full and extraordinary story of why this rematch means what it means. The business war that preceded the announcement was as complicated and combative as anything either man has produced inside the octagon. Because when the UFC finalized its 7-year, $7.7 billion broadcast deal with Paramount and eliminated the traditional pay-per-view model, the fighter whose contract was built entirely around pay-per-view sales looked at the situation and said publicly during a Roblox stream with his son that his contract was essentially void. The 2013 undercard fight at TD Garden in Boston is the data point that every preview of UFC 329 has to begin with, because without it, the entire emotional architecture of what Holloway is bringing into this fight makes no sense. And Holloway has never hidden that the loss to McGregor on that preliminary card is the one result he has been carrying in the back of his mind across every year of what became one of the most accomplished careers the sport has ever produced. McGregor won by unanimous decision, 30-27, 30-27, 30-26, clear and decisive, and tore his ACL during the fight, which meant the victory cost him significantly while setting in motion the trajectory of both careers simultaneously. Because Holloway's response to losing was to go on a 13-fight win streak that produced the featherweight championship, 2 title defenses over Jose Aldo, and the most significant strike volume records in UFC history. He holds the records for most significant strikes landed at 3,655 and most total strikes landed at 3,907. And no other fighter in the history of the sport is within 1,000 of either number, which means the man who took the loss in Boston and built a Hall of Fame career on top of it is one of the most physically and technically dominant competitors the promotion has ever produced across the span of a regular season schedule. McGregor went the other direction with the same starting point, knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds to win the featherweight title, moved up to lightweight, knocked out Eddie Alvarez, became the first fighter in UFC history to hold 2 championship belts simultaneously, crossed into boxing for the Floyd Mayweather spectacle that generated hundreds of millions of dollars, and became the biggest pay-per-view draw the sport had ever produced before the leg snapped at UFC 264 and everything stopped for 4 years and 9 months.
The pay-per-view contract crisis was not a minor negotiating dispute, but a fundamental structural disagreement about what happens when the commercial environment that an athlete's contract was built to operate inside disappears entirely, and the promotion's revenue grows dramatically while the mechanism for compensating its biggest draw no longer exists. McGregor's events against Khabib Nurmagomedov and Dustin Poirier routinely moved over 1 million buys each, and his total pay-per-view generation across his UFC career is the highest in the promotion's history by a margin that makes comparison to other fighters on the roster a different category of conversation. And when that model was replaced by Paramount subscription revenue, he was looking at a contract that no longer had the mechanism to pay him what the parties had agreed his fights were worth. Dana White's solution was a conversion formula, a mathematical mathematical approach that calculates what a fighter would have earned under the old pay-per-view model based on their historical average and converts it into a guaranteed payment under the streaming arrangement. And for McGregor, that figure would be the largest the promotion would have to produce because the inputs going into the calculation are the largest any fighter has ever generated. The message that White sent by agreeing to apply this formula to McGregor, while reportedly not making comparable arrangements for other major stars who fought in the Paramount era, is that the UFC's financial infrastructure acknowledges the specific and unreplicable commercial phenomenon that McGregor represents, and that the promotion's interest in bringing him back was significant enough to find the number that made the return possible. Holloway's motivation for this fight is not the payday or the promotional positioning or the UFC record books he already owns. It is the specific and 13-year-old emotional debt that the 2013 loss created and that every subsequent achievement has existed alongside without erasing. And Daniel Cormier's description of Holloway feeling he has earned this opportunity and wanting to rewrite something that was done so wrong so many years ago is the language of an athlete who has been carrying something specific for a very long time. He is coming into UFC 329 off a loss to Charles Oliveira at UFC 326 in March 2026, a unanimous decision over 5 rounds where he was smothered on the ground and looked flat in ways that the knockouts of Justin Gaethje and the decision over Dustin Poirier had not suggested were coming. And his own acknowledgement that you are only as good as your last fight and that everyone is going to forget about that last fight as soon as possible is the specific competitive clarity that a fighter brings to a matchup that represents exactly the kind of symbolic reset the Holloway frame requires. The welterweight dimension adds a variable that no pre-fight analysis has a clean answer for, because this will be Holloway's debut at 170 pounds in a division he has never competed in at USC level, and the man he is fighting at that weight has competed there twice before with 1 win and 1 loss, meaning McGregor actually has more championship context experience at the weight class than the opponent who is a significant betting favorite. Holloway described McGregor as looking super hungry, noted the boxing exhibition as evidence that he is taking the preparation seriously, and even acknowledged the risk embedded in moving up to a weight class he has never tested, while confirming that he was already in camp for a fight the UFC had not yet officially announced, which is the specific combination of confidence and pragmatism that characterizes a fighter who has decided what he wants and is not waiting for institutional confirmation to begin preparing for it.
The timing of the announcement is the dimension that reveals the most about how the UFC operates as a business, because scheduling the McGregor vs. Holloway announcement on the UFC Vegas 117 broadcast on the same Saturday night that MVP MMA's Ronda Rousey vs. Gina Carano event was airing live on Netflix is not a coincidence, but a strategic deployment of the biggest announcement in MMA against the biggest alternative combat sports broadcast the sport had seen in years. Dana White's counter-programming history is well documented across multiple examples, where competitor announcements or events were met with immediate UFC scheduling responses designed to reclaim the attention of the audience the competitor was attempting to reach, and placing the McGregor return announcement inside a broadcast airing simultaneously with the event that Rousey had been using to publicly challenge the UFC's market position for several months is the most efficient possible expression of that playbook. The UFC 329 card itself, beyond the main event, is being assembled with the specific intent to make International Fight Week 2026 one of the most significant cards the promotion has ever built, with reports indicating Paddy Pimblett versus Benoit Saint-Denis, Gable Stevenson's promotional debut, and Corey Sandhagen versus Mario Bautista as potential additions that would give the card legitimate depth behind a main event that does not require depth to sell, but that benefits from it in terms of the overall commercial picture. The betting markets have opened McGregor as a significant underdog, despite his historical commercial dominance, which is the specific alignment of the sportsbook's actuarial function with the observable reality that a 37-year-old fighter who has not competed in nearly 5 years, whose last actual win came in 40 seconds against a declining opponent, and who will be returning against a fighter with 8 documented competitive performances accumulated during his absence, is facing a mathematical disadvantage that his name recognition does not resolve, but that his commercial value makes irrelevant to the business case for making the fight. The 17-day window between UFC 329 on July 11th and McGregor's 38th birthday on July 14th is the detail that contextualizes the return most specifically, because a fighter returning at 37 years old against one of the most volume-heavy, durable strikers the promotion has ever produced, in a weight class that his opponent is competing in for the first time, is an alignment of variables that produces a genuinely uncertain competitive prediction. The specific qualities that Holloway brings to every fight he competes in, the hand speed that increases across the later rounds rather than diminishing, the output that the record books have quantified as the most sustained in the sport's history, and the cardio that his opponents describe as the most disorienting element of the fight once the middle rounds arrive, are exactly the qualities that McGregor has historically struggled against when opponents have been able to stay on their feet and maintain pace into the later rounds. McGregor's career record of competitive excellence was built specifically on the early finish, on the first-round KO or the first-round submission that removed the durability and cardio questions before they could become the determining factor in the result. And the fights where he was kept in deep water, the Khabib submission loss, the two Poirier defeats, all demonstrated what happens when the early finish does not materialize and the fight becomes a different conversation. None of that changes the commercial reality or the emotional weight of what July 11th represents, which is two fighters who met on a preliminary card in Boston in 2013 when nobody was paying close attention, spent 13 years building Hall of Fame careers on separate paths, and are now meeting in the main event of the biggest card of the summer, with one man looking for redemption across 13 years of unfinished business, and the other looking for proof that the sport did not move on permanently during the 5 years he was absent from it.